has such a strong emotional connection with me that I just wanted to hear what everybody else was thinking. What I picked this week will be the original Blues Brothers. It is one of my favorite movies, if not my all-time favorite movie. It has a lot of emotional meaning to me because it's one of the first movies.
This is a review for Movie Club Strikes Back. This week's film, as selected by Meta, was The Blues Brothers, which came out in 1980, was directed by John Landis, and starred Jake and Elwood Blues, otherwise known as John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd. Now, this was the first Saturday Night Live skit that made it to the big screen. Jake and Elwood Blues and the Blues Brothers Band, most of whom actually made it into the movie, would often do musical numbers on SNL. And if you haven't seen or heard the Blues Brothers do Soul Man, you haven't yet lived. Now again, this is the first time they made a film out of SNL skit, and except for Wayne's World, it hasn't worked since. I mean, you look at Coneheads, or Night at the Roxbury, Superstar, MacGruber, and you learn that what's funny for 2 or 3 minutes isn't necessarily funny for an hour and a half to 2 hours. Except with the Blues Brothers, it just worked. And even, 30 years later, it's still funny. I think the thing that makes this movie really work is the fact that it's not just a comedy. I mean, it is funny, but it's more of a musical. I mean, all the great performances, both by the Blues Brothers Band and all the artists who make cameos, really lend itself to what makes this movie work. And it's not hard to see this as a musical, even though it bucks the standard musical trend. You don't have characters bursting out into song for no reason. I mean, they do burst out to song quite frequently, but it makes sense within the confines of the movie because it's about a blues band and their performances and kind of their travels. So every time you see a musical number, it really makes sense within the context of the film, whether they're at a gospel church or testing instruments at a pawn shop, all the performances, the gigs they do. It makes sense within the framework of the movie. So unlike most other musicals, this actually makes sense and you don't kind of lose yourself in it. The one actual exception, of course, is Aretha Franklin's number, but it's Aretha Franklin, so no points lost there. The other thing that's really notable about this film is just the sheer number of cameos that take place. And not just by the rhythm and blues performers like Ray Charles, James Brown, Aretha Franklin, or John Lee Hooker, who would kind of make sense to be in this film, but just all the other guys who kind of show up. The corrections officer who hands Jake all of his belongings at the beginning of the film, that's Frank Oz, who was a director, but also one of Jim Henson's puppeteers, who did Miss Piggy, Fozzie Bear, and Yoda. The blonde lady that Elwood tries to pick up at the gas station, that's a model. Her name was Twiggy. She was a sex symbol back during the 70s and 80s. And would have been immediately recognizable to the audiences at the time. Then at the end of the film, the county clerk who assesses the taxes for the orphanage, that's Steven Spielberg. And you just see full of that stuff in this movie, and it makes it just such an interesting movie to watch. Now, for many, many years, this film held a record for the most number of stunt cars totaled in a production. The record wasn't actually broken until Blues Brothers 2000. And that's all we're going to say about that film. But it was just an amazing piece of stunt coordination and one of the most entertaining parts of the movie to watch. Kind of out of place, but it still fit in perfectly with this wanted fugitive chase. And just that final chase scene at the end where you got not just the police and the state police, but the National Guard, and they're all trying to hunt down these two guys. Yes, I grew up watching this film. I've always loved it. And even though sometimes it looks a little out of style, it never feels that dated to me, maybe just because it's so entertaining. So I highly recommend watching it. And if you haven't watched it, what have you been doing with your life? Till next time, keep doing what you do.